Israel Adesanya, Kamaru Usman, Alexander Volkanovski. All three of these men had a historic rise in the late 2010s and all had dominant reigns in the early 2020s. For an era of the UFC, the top three pound for pound was easily these three men, with all of them dominating their weight class. The three men who were the best three fighters that we have saw for the past 5 to 8 years of UFC history. But how dominant really were these men during the era of these three dominating? Well, today I want to find out how they risen, how they plateaued, and how they fell. The first out of the three to appear in the UFC was Kamaru Usman. Before, he was the Nigerian nightmare who was just another hungry fighter looking for an opportunity. In 2015, Usman joined the cast of The Ultimate Fighter Season 21, representing the Blackzilians team. Usman throughout the season showcased his relentless wrestling, winning all of his fights and earning his way to the final. In July 2015, Usman faced Haider Hassan at the Ultimate Fighter final, and he won via submission in the second round, earning a UFC contract and announcing himself as a serious threat and prospect in the welterweight division. Usman's first official fight in the UFC would be against a name that is very important later in Leon Edwards. Now, he would beat Leon, and then he would also beat Alexander Yakelov, and at this point Usman was on a 2/3 fight UFC win streak. But at this time, our second guy would appear in Alexander Volkanovski, who would make his debut November 26, 2016, getting a TKO win over Yusuke Kasuya. Now, the next date that we arrived to is February 2018. At this point, Usman's on a 7-fight win streak, getting wins over people like future champion Sean Strickland, and then he also had the win, obviously, over Leon Edwards. And at this point, Volkanovski himself also had 3 wins, and on the night that I'm about to talk about, would get his 4th win, making it a 4-fight win streak. But on February 10th, 2018, Israel Adesanya would make his debut, fighting Rob Wilkinson, who he would TKO in the second round. So at this point in time, we finally got all 3 of these guys in the UFC. Now, not all 3 of these guys were saw as the same. Honestly, from the get-go, Izzy was saw as someone with extreme potential who a lot of people had a lock to become a champion. But then you had people like Volk and Usman who really weren't like that. Izzy, out of all these guys, was definitely the most predictable to become champion. But when we get to the actual title reigns, the other 2 did succeed. Now at this point, it was practically fucking go time for all of these guys. You had Usman, who would beat Emil Meek like just a month before Izzy debuted. Adesanya would fight Marvin Vettori, who he'd eventually have a rematch for with the belt. Usman would go on to defeat top contender at the time, Damian Maia, absolutely dominating him. Adesanya would go on to beat Brad Tavares, another dominant performance. Usman would then beat another former champ in Rafael dos Anjos. And then at this point, this is where one of them finally caught gold. Usman versus Woodley, March 2019. March 2019 marked the coronation of Kamaru Usman as he faced welterweight champion Tyron Woodley at UFC 235. But going into this fight, Tyron Woodley was just thought as a better version of Kamaru Usman. This isn't a situation where, how I was saying with Izzy, where everyone was saying this guy's going to be a champ. Usman never was that. People predicted Tyron to easily get his 5th defense, but that's not what happened. Usman dominated from start to finish, securing a unanimous decision victory and becoming the first African-born UFC champion. And in this, he broke Tyron Woodley. Tyron Woodley was never the same. So in March 2019, Usman was the first of these 3 to catch a belt, starting his historic reign. But Adesanya would kind of start his reign only a month later. In April 2019, Israel Adesanya took on Kelvin Gastelum for the interim middleweight title in one of the greatest fights in UFC history. After 5 rounds of back and forth action, Adesanya secured a unanimous decision win where he really put it on in the 5th round, showing that the guy had the heart, he had the dog, and set the unification bout with him versus Robert Whittaker. This is where the biggest star in the sport since Conor McGregor was born, okay, in Israel Adesanya, having one of the most insane fights we've ever saw versus Kelvin Gastelum, and getting the interim belt while he was at it. Now, I've been talking a lot about Usman and Adesanya at this point, and obviously Usman has the undisputed belt, Adesanya has the interim belt, but Volk wasn't that far behind, okay? He'd been packing a win streak and recently had just gotten a win against Chad Mendes, and now his next fight just a month after Adesanya versus Gastelum would be against Jose Aldo, where Volk continued his rise in the featherweight division, taking on the former champ in Brazil. Volk outworked out Aldo over 3 rounds, earning a unanimous decision win, and he earned his shot at the featherweight title. Now it was time for the coronation of Israel Adesanya. In October 2019, Adesanya faced Robert Whittaker in a title unification bout at UFC 243 in Melbourne. My voice should have went entirely, what the fuck? With a spectacular knockout in the 2nd round, Adesanya became the undisputed middleweight champion of the world. 2 out of our 3 guys now have belts. And just 2 months later, one of our guys would make their first defense of the belt, okay? On the same night that our last guy would win his belt. Usman versus Covington happened. This saw Kamaru Usman defend his title for the first time against Colby Covington in a thrilling war. Usman broke Covington's jaw and finished him in the 5th round, solidifying his reign as welterweight king. At this time, Usman had a lot of accusations of being boring, and having a fight of the year candidate puts that shit away. And on the same night, Volkanovski versus Max Holloway 1 would happen. Alexander Volkanovski faced the featherweight champ Max with a flawless game plan. Volkanovski dethroned Max via unanimous decision, becoming the new featherweight king. At this point, all 3 of our guys got belts, and now it's time for these guys to become reigning champions and, you know, be the pound for pound top 3 guys of the early 2020s. In March 2020, Adesanya defended his belt for the first time against Yoel Romero. This one is fucking, you know, worth skipping over. Insanely boring, but Izzy won. And then at this point, Usman versus Masvidal 1 would happen. Coming into this, Masvidal was the hottest star that the sport had after, you know, Izzy, you know, fucking up in his last performance. It slightly shifted towards Masvidal. I'd say with the 2 biggest stars, and any little thing would tip it in the other one's favour. Usman faced Masvidal on just 6 days notice, and Usman controlled the fight with wrestling, earning a unanimous decision victory, but the most the guy did was foot stomps. And then at this point, Volk and Holloway 2 would happen. On the same night, Volk defended his title against Max Holloway in a highly controversial split decision that I think most of the time thought he lost. I mean, it's not looking too hot for our guys right now, okay? It really ain't looking too hot. But things would really start changing as Adesanya would fight Paulo Costa in September of 2020. Adesanya's 2nd title defense against Paulo Costa was an insanely one-sided striking display. Adesanya finished Costa in the 2nd round, silencing his critics from the Yoel Romero fight with another dominant performance. And then in February of 2021, Kamaru Usman would fight Gilbert Burns. Usman faced his former teammate Gilbert Burns, who was on the tough season with him. Burns rocked Usman earlier, but the champion recovered and finished Burns in the 3rd round to defend his welterweight title, which was fucking... It was just insane. It was just insane at the time, okay? And between 2021 and 2022, Volkanovski would get wins over Brian Ortega, the Korean Zombie, and he would defeat Max Holloway in their trilogy, putting any fucking criticism on the second fight to bed, he dominated Max for 3 rounds, okay? And this was the peak. Actually, I won't even say it was, as he would move up to fight Islam-Makhachev, lose. Most people thought he won, and then he'd go on to defeat Yair Rodriguez, who was the interim champ. And at this point, this was the peak of Volk's powers. It was a similar case for Kamaru Usman. At this point, between 2021 and 2022, he would defeat Jorge Masvidal in a rematch, KOing him out cold. Any fucking, stigma or criticism from the first fight was put to bed, and then he'd defeat Colby Covington once again from their very close fight all the way back in 2019. At this point, he had 5 title defenses, and him himself was on top of the world. We had an outlier though, and that outlier was Izzy Adesanya, who in March of 2021 would actually lose in an upper weight class, so his belt wasn't on the line, against Jan Blachowicz, and he got beaten all 5 rounds. Then he'd go on to get very boring wins over Marvin Vettori, Robert Whittaker, which a lot of people thought Whittaker won, and Jared Cannonier. And at this point, it wasn't looking too hot for Izzy compared to all the other guys. But to be honest, all the dates I mentioned, it started getting iffy for all of these guys. At this point, they all had 5 title defenses each. Every single one of them had 5 title defenses, okay? That's some historic shit. And they were easily the top 3 pound for pound, especially Usman and Volk, who it was heavily debated who was the pound for pound #1 fighter in the world. Starting off with the downfall of Izzy, he would lose to Alex Pereira after winning most of the fight. Now, he would go on to beat Alex once again. I just fucking dropped something. He'd go on to beat Alex once again, regaining his title, but then he'd lose his first title defense of his new reign to massive underdog Sean Strickland. And when trying to start his 3rd reign by winning the belt back again, he'd lose to Dricus du Plessis. Now with Volkanovski, he would have a rematch against Islam-Makhachev and got knocked out in the 1st round. And then we're moving down to fight for the featherweight belt. He got knocked out cold by challenger Ilia Topuria. Then we got Kamaru, who for me, I have the most hope for Kamaru out of any of these guys to actually ever come back. He would dominate Leon Edwards for 4.5 rounds before being fucking head kicked out of nowhere. He then lose their trilogy, and then in my opinion, you get scammed out of at least a fucking draw against Khamzat Chimaev. As you can see, the era of these 3 really ain't much of a thing anymore. From 2015 to 2021, none of these guys even had a single loss in the UFC. But now, combined, I think it's like fucking 7 or 8 or something like that. It's not looking too hot for any of them. Izzy and Volk are both on 2-fight losing streaks, and Kamaru's on a 3-fight losing streak. These guys went for the top 3 pound for pound, for none of them, except for Volk, even being in the top 15 pound for pound. Shit's fucked up, man. It's a harsh sport, but it is what it is. I just thought I'd do a video about this because it's, the era that I give the fuck most about. So if you enjoy, like, subscribe, do all that. In a bit, man. Much love.